ladies and gentlemen. There are many places that decided to reopen, and outdoor dining is one of the biggest option, especially for people that want to eat out. Now, there is confusion because, many places are talking about a second wave, and to me, that's ridiculous. You haven't even gotten through the first wave, and there's a lot of confusion about how this reopening process is going to go. They'll tell you, oh, it's a first phase, second phase, third phase, and so on and so on. So this came out on NPR June 17th, 2020, amid confusion about reopening. An expert explains how to assess COVID-19 risk.
Stage of the pandemic. More cities are opening. The numbers have gone down in some regions and are going up in others. As cities do open, many Americans are confronted with difficult decisions about how to safely return to work and which other activities feel safe and which aren't worth the risk. With me to talk about those issues and more is Michael Osterholm, one of the nation's top experts in infectious diseases. He's warned for years that a pandemic was likely to happen and that we'd better start preparing. Osterholm is the founder and director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota, where he's a professor of public health. From 1975 to 99, he served in various roles at the Minnesota Department of Health, including as state epidemiologist. He's led investigations of outbreaks, including foodborne diseases, toxic shock syndrome, hepatitis B in healthcare settings, and HIV in healthcare workers. Osterholm is the author of the book Deadliest Enemy, Our War Against Killer Germs, which has just been published in a new edition with a new foreword about COVID-19. Michael Osterholm, welcome to Fresh Air. Let's talk about where are we now, what patterns we're seeing in places where cases are going up and others where cases are going down. What's the larger pattern?
I, as an epidemiologist, would always like to come on and share with you definitive information about this is where it's going, this is what's happening, this is what we can expect. And I must say, since the very first day of this pandemic, I don't think we're in a more confused position about what's happening. In the United States, we have 21 states where we see cases increasing, some of them quite dramatically. In 21 states, in addition to that, we have cases decreasing, and 9 right in the middle where it's just level. And we can't tie this to necessarily reopening the economy. So the states where we're seeing cases decrease have also had reopenings. And so I think it's the virus is doing what it's doing right now, and we just aren't quite sure what it's going to do next.
Are there different strains of the virus in different parts of the country that might account for otherwise inexplicable reasons for rates going up or down?
We don't have any evidence that strains are playing any kind of a role. But if we do take a step back and look at the influenza model, in other words, does that tell us anything about what might be happening here, realizing this is a coronavirus, not influenza? We have never understood why in previous influenza pandemics, and there have been 10 of them in the last 250 years, do you see cases occur in the first several months of what we would call a first wave? And a wave being defined by peaks of cases and then literally a trough where cases, in a sense, almost disappear. We've seen that in all the previous influenza pandemics, that disappearance may last for 2 or 3 months, and then we see a big second peak. We have no idea why the first peak occurred. We have no idea why they go away. We have no idea why it comes back. And then a second wave ends too. And so there's something surely in the biology of these viruses that's causing that to happen. Is that what's happening right now with the coronavirus? We don't know. It's very clear that there's extremely high levels of transmission occurring in parts of the United States right now, why we don't see it in others. And I don't know if that means that this is going to act more like an influenza virus in terms of how it spreads and what we might expect for cases in the population.
I think I hear you saying, even if you're in a place where the cases are going down, that's not necessarily a sign of the future, they might go back up again, and not even necessarily because of behavior in that region, but just because of the behavior of the virus.
Exactly. It's clear and compelling that human behavior is important in transmitting the virus. And we saw that very early in the United States as well as in Asia and Europe, where we had these very hot outbreaks that developed, where by doing the kind of physical distancing that we did, we're quite certain that we were able to shave cases off the big peak that might have occurred. But in terms of whether if the virus is eliminated out of an area, if it stays out of an area, that may only be in part due to human behavior. So we surely don't want to stop emphasizing the importance of the distancing. But as we also now understand from using an influenza-like model, if cases should disappear over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks, or at least be greatly reduced, that is not necessarily good news. It surely seems counterintuitive that we would want cases to happen. I don't want anybody to get sick, severely ill, or die. But if we saw a trough of cases in the next 2 months, I think that would really tell us that we're likely to have this big second wave, much like we would see with influenza, which could be much worse. I think the one factor that we must keep in mind at all times is that to date we have about 5 to 7% of the U.S. population has been infected with this virus. That's it. All the pain, suffering, death, and economic disruption have occurred with 5 to 7%. But this virus is not going to slow down transmission overall. It may come and go, but it will keep transmitting until we get at least 60 or 70% of the population infected and hopefully develop immunity. Or if we get a vaccine, they can get us there too. And so I want to be really clear. None of us are suggesting this is going to stop and go away. But if we see these starts and stops of the virus in between times, it's just we don't know quite what's happening.
60 to 70% of Americans getting the virus, that's a terrifyingly high number.
It is a very sobering number, if nothing else. And again, as I pointed out, we're in a race right now with the virus. Think of this as kind of viral genetics and physics all combined, where the virus is going to keep with the way it gets transmitted, what it does, how it does, what it does, is all basically driven by that biology. But at the same time, it's going to keep transmitting in the population, much like viral gravity. It's just going to keep happening. And our challenge is, can we get a vaccine first to get more people to be immune to this virus than having to develop that immunity as a result of getting infected and either seriously ill and dying, or infected and recovering, and for many, hopefully, even a mild illness.
You pointed out that we can't stay closed forever. It would kill the economy. It would kill people's livelihoods. It would kill life as we know it. On the other hand, there are great risks with reopening. What do you see in the near future in terms of, cities opening or closing or going back and forth between the two?
I think right now, most of the world, not just the United States, but most of the world, is quite confused about what to do or why to do it. And what I mean by that is that already I think we've seen pandemic fatigue set in the United States. Right around Memorial Day, the country was ready to say, we're done with this. We're unlocking. We're going to no longer do the kind of physical distancing that's been recommended. We should reopen the economy. Let's the cards fall where they may. And I think to myself, wow, that's what's happened after 5% of the population has been infected. How might we ever get a population to do what it needs to do to reduce transmission to hopefully get to that vaccine before the disease gets us to that 60 or 70% level? And I think about that's going to be months and months. This is not what is going to last for a few more weeks. And if you look at influenza pandemics, they all did last for years, not for just a couple of months. And so I think that's the challenge we have today, is helping people understand is we've got to figure out how to live with this virus as much as we've had to painfully understand how to die with this virus. And somehow we can't live locked down for 18 months. That, as you said, that will not only kill the economic issues that we all are concerned about, but it'll also have the impact on society that will be also quite devastating. At the same time, we can't let this virus just run willy-nilly. We're already seeing hospitals today in parts of the United States where they are literally to the top of their ability to handle cases in intensive care units. They're running out of beds. And so somehow we're going to have to figure out how do we thread the rope through the needle in the middle.
One of the things we're dealing with now is the politicization of the virus. Some public health officials have resigned because there have been protests around their homes by people protesting mandatory masks. In Florida, a data expert in the health department refused to misreport the number of cases and was fired. She was asked to report a lower number than actually existed. She says, her name is Rebecca Jones, and she says a superior asked her to open up the data and alter the numbers so that the state's coronavirus positivity rating would change from 18% to 10%, and therefore the state would look like it met its target to reopen. What are some of the examples you're seeing where the virus has become a political issue instead of a health issue?
We have an extremely divided country today. And to add to that, we first of all have the most severe pandemic the world's experienced since 1918. I think people don't realize the impact this virus has had already. Then you look at the economic implications, and while some will see the economy as recovering right now, I know what's ahead yet. We have some really very painful days ahead for the economy. So we haven't seen economic issues like this literally dating back to the Great Depression. We have politicized issues that should never be politicized, mask or no mask. That should be about public health. Do they work? Do they not work? How well do they work? But no matter how we try to put that message out there, we find that people will accept it for the way they view it. And I personally have, had experiences that have not been pleasant with people that think that somehow I'm part of a deep state perpetrating this pandemic on the United States from China for purposes that have something to do with politics. And, there's no getting around it with these people. This is what they believe.
Tell me more about the pushback you're getting from.
Oh, you should see the emails I get. I refer emails on with some regularity to the University of Minnesota Police Department just because of the threatening nature of them. And I'm just one of many that are getting similar kinds of emails. And it's people who believe that, this has been a conscious effort to destroy the economy, to somehow reflect negatively on this administration. They believe it to be all made up, that none of this is true. And so I think that it's not about science and reason. And at a time when we should all be trying to come together, all of us fighting this virus, and yet right now this has become almost the seed of really what I would call painful accusations and beliefs that somehow this isn't really about a public health problem. This is about a partisan issue.
Have you ever seen anything like this before, where a virus has become a partisan issue and where people like you are getting threats?
I can't say that it's ever been like this. During the early days of HIV/AIDS, there surely were challenges that occurred. And when we look back on that, some of that was very legitimate. Members of the gay community who, were reflecting on what was happening and not happening by governments. And I think, fortunately, some of the gay activists made governments have to get a lot better, and they did at this. This one is different, though. This one, as much as there are disagreements, you can say that there's unscientific uncertainty. This is one where it's almost as if somehow someone has made up a story upon which now to fit the narrative, meaning that they made the story up first, and okay, well, let's figure out how this virus fits into that story. And that story is that this is not true, that all these efforts have been undertaken with alternative purposes in mind, not to really stop the transmission of the virus, and that people are intentionally not being truthful in government or in public health. And I think it fits in with almost the anti-science movement. It fits in with a lot of areas that we have to deal with in terms of public health today.
It fits in with the anti-vax movement too?
Yes, in fact, we have data that has been obtained over the course of the past few weeks, suggesting that there may be as high as 30% of U.S. citizens that would refuse to take an effective COVID-19 vaccine should one be developed because of the anti-vaccine viewpoints.
Are there other ways that you've seen the virus become a political issue to the detriment of public health?
Well, I wouldn't call it a political issue. I would call it a lack of government response. And what I mean by that is that we obviously are consumed by COVID-19, and we should be. As I pointed out, we've not seen any infectious disease, virus, bacteria, or any other kind of infectious agent cause this kind of severe disease and the number of deaths since 1918. But having said that, this is not our only public health problem. And one of the things I fear greatly is that a year from now, we're going to be talking about COVID-related deaths in kids around the world, not from COVID, but from the fact that we virtually stopped our immunization programs to try to deal with COVID. And I think,
you know what? He's probably right. It's going to be a lot of changes a year from now, especially as this thing continues to mutate. So we shall see. I mean, there's really not much we can do but wait and see what happens in the fall. But we know right now this thing ain't going away. And with all the protesting continuing on in the streets, there's no possible way it's going to go anywhere during the summer. But now that we have North Carolina possibly closing, restaurants voluntarily closing in Florida, I think we already see what direction this is going in. But y'all, please tell me what you think. I don't think there should be any confusion over reopening. You shouldn't be reopening at all. Not until you have proven you got this thing under control, and no state in this country has that kind of track record. Not one. But y'all, please tell me what you think about what you just heard. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace, family.